Oh my God, is that a Let Me Speak to a Manager hat? Yes. When were you planning to show me that? Just
That's
here?
right, you son of a bitch. Right now, I got swag and you don't.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Oh my God, is that a Let Me Speak to a Manager hat? Yes. When were you planning to show me that? Just here?
That's right, you son of a bitch. Right now, I got swag and you don't.
How do I get merch? Is there a have you changed our website? Is there a link for merch now?
Oh, buddy, we got a bright future. We got a bright future.
Hey, I know there's only 17 people listening to this, but go to our website right now and get yourself the trucker hat that Frank is wearing. It is absolutely glorious.
If my lighting in my office at home wasn't just complete shit, you'd actually be able to see the logo.
Oh, it's so good. I'm so excited that we have merch. You don't have an official business until you have merch. You don't need revenue. You don't need sales. That stuff is overblown. You need merch. Without merch, you don't have a real business.
For those of you that are following the Yanni Katz podcast, which is the one we released this week, they made 775 pounds at their car wash. And I completely and totally believe they had such success for two reasons. Number one, they listened to us in our podcast, clearly. And number two, they had merch that said, "We accept tips," with their adorable faces in the middle of the t-shirt. And
I can tell you, by far, that was the best gem that either of us gave Yanni. Him going out and making those t-shirts, and I think they had a sweatshirt with pictures of their cute little faces saying "We accept tips." I think, what did he say? They get over 100 pounds in tips?
Just in tips.
Not including grandma and grandpa paying for their supplies, which was clutch.
Right.
It took that was a profitable little week they had. Wasn't
the
it?
margin in that business is strong.
Pretty good. So today we are having a very deep existential conversation, which is pretty abnormal for Frank and I to have anything deep or substantial in our conversations. But this one,
lunch is typically substantial.
Lunch for the food is usually more substantial than the actual conversations.
Before we actually hit record, we were both finishing lunch.
We were both eating, and we'll probably be eating again as soon as we finish this.
Clearly.
We are talking about how much do we have left of everything, and the basis of this conversation is a now rather famous blog post on Tim Urban's blog. And this post kind of blew him up, made it pretty big. But Frank, maybe talk a little bit about who gave you this and how you came across it.
So one of our loyal listeners, Mr. Nickel, forwarded this to me, and it's the name of the blog is Wait But Why, and the article itself is called The Tail End. So the tail end, I mean, it could be 100 things, but he's basically talking about the tail end of life in this instance. And this is a little over 6 years old at this point, and this thing's gone viral. Like I had never seen it, and then I talked to Ian about it. He's like, "Oh yeah, that thing's gone viral. Like everybody's got it." And it's a really interesting article. We'll talk about a couple of things. Like he instead of just saying like I have so many years left or days left or things like that, he's like, how many more times am I going to eat tacos, or how many more dumplings am I going to eat in my life? And I really enjoyed the article for many reasons, but he goes right into dumplings, and he describes it as he still has about a fuck ton left to eat, which is incredible. So like, not only is it dumplings, which speaks to me, in addition to that, his unit of measure is a unit of measure that I really like. So those two reasons alone are like some of the reasons, but it's really neat because he starts to talk about like, how much time do you have left with your parents or your granddad, or like your favorite sports team. And it's a fascinating read. And it makes you just kind of realize very quickly that we don't have as much time left as we would like, or we think.
We've talked about this in a previous episode. Frank's nickname on his high school football team was the Italian dumpling, and he's proud of that. So that's what got him reading this blog post in the first place. And I can understand why he would have an affinity based on a nickname like that.
For sure. But the other reason I thought this was fascinating too is Nickel texted it to me and I went to read it. He goes, it's a 3-minute read. And it took me like 6 minutes. So I was like, man, he reads a lot faster than I do. I hope I have enough life left to catch up.
It's kind of like him telling you running 10 miles, it would be a certain time. It always takes you twice as long to do that too.
Correct.
He seems to do things faster than the average human.
Except eat ice cream. I can whoop his ass.
You'll kill him in that for sure.
So there's another kind of story about this too that's interesting. Besides having incredible merch, and there's just not a lot of time left, so I had to prioritize it. Having kids, like I'm on the precipice of kid number 2. My wife is incredibly pregnant, like 9 months pregnant at this point. And by the time this podcast actually publishes, like I'll probably have had the baby. And I was having a conversation a week or so ago when I was in Scottsdale with my mastermind group. And there's a guy in the group who's 2 years younger than me, but his wife is older than me. She's almost 50. She's 49. And he just wants a baby real bad. She's got kids from her previous marriage, but they've been trying and it hasn't worked. And one of the things I told them is, I will guarantee you that you haven't thought about how long your kids will be with your wife before she was to die. If she has kids at nearly 50, like they're going to be like in their late 30s or early 40s if she makes it to 90. And he's like, no, I hadn't even thought about that. And I was like, of course not. Like nobody thinks about these kind of things until you have kids. So like your perspective drastically changes around these things when you have children, because like I didn't get older. Clearly I was a day older the night between having no kid and a kid, but I felt like I was in a different generation. Like it immediately ages you and puts you in a very different place when you've got a life that you're responsible for, and when you have kids.
I think so. So you've got another story that Nickel likes to tell about marbles.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So there's another article. I'm going to pull it up and I'm going to read some of this because it's fascinating. The story is called 1,000 Marbles. So I'm going to work my way through it relatively fast, but basically the guy says, you see, I sat down one day and did a little arithmetic. The average person lives to about 75. So depending on which story you listen to, 90, 75. I know some live more, some live less, but on average, folks live to about 75. This guy then took and multiplied and came up with how many Saturdays he had left in his life. And he decided that because of his current age, he was 55 years old, he had about 1,000 Saturdays left. And this guy just loved his Saturdays. He had like a woodshed in the back, and he would, wake up early, get a cup of coffee, go to his woodshed, sit back there. It was his favorite place. So what he decided to do was he ran out and bought 1,000 marbles. So he went to like 6 different toy stores and bought all these marbles, and he filled up all these jars. And then every Saturday he took a marble out and threw it away. He said the sensation was that he felt like he was watching time diminish with each marble he took out. So he started to really focus as he pulled the marble out on the things that were important. And then he said he thought about what was the most important, things that were less important. And he says, as you're taking a marble out and kind of throwing it away, there's nothing more tangible than realizing that you're just kind of pushing time aside and you're letting it go. So the way that the story goes, and if you Google 1,000 marbles, you'll be able to find this. He gets through his 1,000 marbles and he's not dead. And he realizes that every day past that day and every Saturday past that day is a complete gift. And, he wants to make a prayer because he's gotten to that point. He wraps up, this is an interview. He wraps up the interview. And when the interview's over, he says, I'm going to take my wife for breakfast and go about my day. So it's one of those things that Nickel uses it like when he's had to give sermons at his church and things along those lines, because it's a really cool story that just makes you realize like time is fleeting. And if you look over my shoulder, I guess it's this shoulder. I mentioned this to Ian before. I have basically 3 places I do all my work. I work in my office at home, and I have a conference room and an office at the office. And I have an hourglass in all of those locations. It's one of those things that I realize that we're just sand through an hourglass. We don't have a lot of time in our life. So you have to have some measure of that and remind yourself not to take for granted the gift that we have that is life.
So the marble story that I heard growing up was, if you take a jar and you put a marble in it every time you have sex with your girlfriend, then you get married. If you take a marble out every time you have sex with your wife, who was your girlfriend, you will never deplete the jar, no matter how long you are married. So that was, when you said I'm about to tell the marble story, I was like, oh, I know that one. But you have a totally different one that's sweeter about old men and woodworking. So they tell different stories in Florida than they do in Detroit, apparently.
Literally.
So in general, I think, Frank, humans tend to overestimate how much time we have left. I think that's fair. You get into a daily grind, a daily rhythm, and you always assume a period in your life that's going really well is going to just keep going well, and it's always going to be there. And it's a big time fallacy. So whether it's 75 or, Frank and I have bench pressed a lot in our life and done a lot of deadlifts. So we'll probably live to 90 because those kind of high school workouts are really important for longevity. We've done some military press for sure. So maybe some standing curls with dumbbells.
We've done our best to offset these incredible workouts with Ben's chili bowl and large pizzas, but we wash it all down with red wine and
4-minute breaks in between every set, to really make sure you catch your breath while you're, reading your phone.
Washing it down.
Our workouts are intense.
Yeah, washing it down with good red wine is going to ensure longevity. We have a lot of great research on the French.
So we're clearly living to 90. So, that's about 45 years left for the two of us. So, you start adding up. So, based on this kind of logic, that's 45 Super Bowls. And when you think about it that way, how many I love the Super Bowl. It's a fun day. I like to gamble. I bet on about 100 prop bets during it. I like it when I'm involved in a party. I like it when I'm just watching it with my kids. But I love the Super Bowl. It's a fun day. And there's only 45 left. There's only 45 Christmas left. There's only 45 Easter's left. I only have 45 birthdays left. We were talking about our fantasy football league and how much we love it. And it's like, well, how long are we going to keep doing those little trips with Paxton and Nilo with our stupid little league? Maybe 20, maybe 30. How many of those do we have left? And when you think of it that way, do you appreciate them more? We might have 10 presidential cycles left to go through and pay attention and watch. Which might be a blessing, as annoying as they've been lately. How many times have we been to Vegas? And how many more Vegas trips are we going to go on, right? I've been there 25, 30 times. I don't have 25, 30 trips left to Vegas. So, I don't know that I get as into how many tacos am I going to eat the rest of my life, because that's a lot of tacos. I don't feel like I'm depleting those fast enough to care. But when you take some of the bigger ones, the bigger things here, it certainly makes you kind of stop and think, I should probably appreciate that just a bit more.
For those of you that know us, or for those of you that have been listening to this podcast for a while, Ian's an in the moment guy. And I've learned a lot from Ian about living in the moment and enjoying the moment. And I'm probably more reflective of the two of us. So I think kind of like the underlying theme of this episode for me is that balance between knowing that you do in fact have only a certain amount of time left and kind of relishing in it, but also enjoying that moment. And I can tell a story from back in college. Nickel was my college roommate, and we were roommates. So like every day we saw each other multiple times a day for 2.5 years. And it dawned on us at some point, like, this is going to end. Like, we're sitting on our uncomfortable ass couches, and we had this picture of this bear. It was like a polar bear, and it was like laying on its stomach, and it was just awesome. And we got it because it was like what I look like with air conditioning on after like a workout. It was like, but we like, so we were underneath that having this conversation. And that was the whole point, is just like, we're going to have to relish this, because at some point we're going to be grown up. We're going to probably live in different cities. We're going to have families. We're going to have businesses and careers, and we're not going to be able to hang out. Like, we're going to have to talk 3 or 4 times a year in person if we're lucky. And we've done a great job of staying in touch, but we're not roommates anymore. So you don't have that same thing. So you you got to understand when you got something great and really take advantage of it, and then not lose sight of it going forward.
I think there's, you and I are an exception to the rule. I think you're certainly an exception to my rule in that most people's best friends stay their best friends throughout life. And the reason is it's very hard to replicate the amount of hours you spend with someone before you have responsibilities, wife, kids, jobs, so people that you were friends with in high school and grade school, but my best friend when I was 9 years old, his name was Mike Cullen, just an awesome guy, but I was best friends with this guy for, 5 or 6 years. When I say best friends, I mean, every day of summer, he was he was like a brother. He would stay he had his own set of toiletries at my house, his own clothes. My mom washed his clothes. We were close. And he would spend the night for weeks at a time. And then I would go, and he was half a mile away in Trenton. It wasn't like we just, I had a pool and he'd stay, and I'd go over to his house and we'd play hockey, and I'd stay at his house for 4 or 5 days. And I don't talk to him a lot anymore. We didn't go to the same college after high school. We kind of dropped off talking. But when you do reach out to him, there's not many people I know that I've met in the last 15 years that I've spent nearly as much time or know as well as someone that I knew so well 30 years ago. And I think it's the same with your friends in high school, your friends in college. You get that 12 hours a day, 300 days a year spending time with someone. Take friends I meet now, other parents of kids that I coach or that I work with. And those are probably the people I spend the most time with now that are new friends. You can't even get close to the amount of hours. You can't touch the amount of hours, let's say, a good friend of mine here that our kids play the same sport. At the most, I'll see him an hour or two a day at a practice, and you're both kind of busy and focused on the kids, and we'll have some beers here and there, or your neighbors, but you're not touching the amount of time you had with your parents, with your brothers, your sisters, your best friends when you're younger. So I think that's why a lot of those relationships just last forever, because you're just so much deeper with those people than you are with anyone you meet later in life.
The volume of time is just, you can't replicate it. And when you're a kid, it just, you have more of it because you have less other responsibilities. And it's funny, like you and I know each other incredibly well. Like I know Nilo, you know Nickel. I've never heard of Mike Cullen, and you've never heard of Hanko Magnuson, my buddy, who is my best friend up until like middle school. And it's like, we all have those. And if you're lucky, you get to kind of pick up where you left off with those people. But the thing that I was starting to think about, Ian, while you said that, is there's a debate, right? Like my wife does not want our sons to play football. And I struggle with that because my best relationships all came from football. Now there's other sports that can replace it, but like, it's really hard for me as a father of boys to think about not having my boys play the sport that introduced me to the friends, and it gave me the time. Like with Nickel specifically, like he and I used to throw sideline passes together. And while we were doing that, we were talking and becoming great friends. And, of the adult friends that I have from high school, I still have 10 or 15 of them that I talk to regularly that all came from that. And it's because there's this crucible where you're doing things together and you're spending time together and you're forging. The football's important, but the relationship and the time and having something and a common goal and common enemies really bonds you together with other people. And it's very hard to replicate that. And like Ian and I met through a company, you very rarely meet people later in life where you get these great relationships. It's just so much harder. If you're lucky post college, you might meet 3 to 5 really good friends because there's just not enough time to meet more.
Though, as Max gets older, Ellie's going to come to the realization that Cava men were built and designed to move other huge human beings around. And she'll understand that this is his calling. She'll get it.
I am an incredible salesman, and it's going to bear out if I'm any good or not.
My advice to you is don't bother arguing now for the next 8 years. Once he gets to a certain age, he's going to do whatever the hell he wants, and she's going to lose. So it's not worth arguing. Don't put him in tackle football when he's 6'7". IJ's not touched tackle football. He's going to start this year at 10, 11. But once they get to a certain age, mom and dad don't have any influence on that stuff.
The important thing isn't tackle football or not. It's I want him around kids where he has an opportunity to meet other kids and have those relationships, because those relationships have meant so much.
Sports are huge. Sports are huge. You know, you keep those friendships, you remember those teams your whole life, you remember the leadership lessons, all that. But, you know, it's that those big milestones, graduating college, graduating high school, getting married, having kids, you know, kind of some of those big milestones, they just stop things that you think would never end, you know, where you've gone to the same party every year. I don't know when it is that I quit going to New Year's Eve parties, but at some point it just happened. And I certainly wasn't thinking of my last one. This is the last one. It just was the last one. It was probably when I had kids when it happened. But when you're in that party, you're not thinking, well, this is it, the last hurrah. You're just having a rip roaring time and that's it. It just doesn't happen again. That's usually the way it works.
I can't even think about being up at midnight. Like for what?
I you know, in my 20s, you know, used to do boys trips all the time, epic boys trips. And in 2004, I planned this thing. So I planned it. I convinced everyone we were going to go to Germany. We were going to do Oktoberfest. Figured out where we were going to stay, got us the hotels, worked with everyone on the dates, the times. And then I got invited to a Redskins game, you know, by one of the owners of the Redskins for the second NVR interview. So it wasn't like I could say, hey, that doesn't work for me. It was kind of a very specific weekend, and I was very close to uprooting my entire life, leaving Chicago. I was in the middle of all of it. And I ultimately had to bag out of the Oktoberfest trip that I planned, that all the boys were going on and were excited about, and who did go on the trip without me. And at the time, I can remember thinking, I'll get you guys on the next trip, right? And I think I even said that, like, hey, next trip, look, next one will be just as epic. And they went and had an amazing time. But there was never another Oktoberfest trip. There was never another Europe trip. You know, I got to DC, I got busy. Some of the other boys started getting married. Boys trips kind of went the way of the dinosaur slowly after. And that just happened. So it's like when you have an opportunity for something epic, you can't think to yourself, that'll just come back.
But life is, you don't get to say yes. It's very hard to say yes to all of those things. If you're like a tech billionaire, or if you're someone who just, you know, if you always say yes to things, there's usually not consequence, and it doesn't usually age well. So what I've always used as kind of my life lesson is I try not to miss the epic moments, and I try and be present for the epic moments. So here is a fail. So in 2009, Ian calls me up. He's like, my buddy is making wine now. He's from Chicago. The new president just got elected from Chicago. And I didn't go to
inauguration ball.
Inauguration ball.
We had tickets to Obama's inauguration ball, and my buddy was supplying the champagne from his company for the inaugural toast by Michelle Obama.
Yep. I bought it. I mean, I even bought it. I don't know if I even ever told you this. I bought a tux. I didn't have a tux back then. So I bought a tux. The damn thing sat in the closet. I didn't go. And ultimately, not very long thereafter, I quit that job. And I missed it.
What did you miss it for, though? I remember this conversation. Remember where I was when I was.
We had like a corporate audit. And I'm like,
I had a meeting in Reston, right? You had to be in our corporate headquarters that Monday or Tuesday. You had the like
it was the next day, and I was just like, I can't do it. I got a lot of pressure, and I didn't do it, and I missed what would have been an epic party. But on the other side of that, a few years earlier, the Washington Nationals were having their first ever game, and a buddy of mine, and this is, you know, I was broke. I didn't have any money. I couldn't have, like, you had to get tickets back then. Like, someone called you and said, hey, I got tickets. So someone called me up and it's like, hey, I got tickets for the first ever Washington Nationals game. I'm like, I had a recruiting dinner that night. So we were going to recruit new people to come work for the company. And nobody really audited those things. So I was like, screw it. I called another kid up and I'm like, hey, I have to bail on this. I had something come up. Can you run this recruiting dinner for me? He's like, sure. He was a great kid. So the recruiting dinner went off without a hitch. Nobody knew a thing. I ended up going to the game with Lee. We're standing right behind home plate. And I said, hey, Lee, do you want to stand up for the first pitch? And he goes, nah, I'm not going to stand up. I'm going to sit down. I'm like, dude, you should stand. It's the first pitch. He's like, nope, I'm sitting. The next day in the Washington Post, this is back when you still used to get newspapers. I was like 15 people call me and they're like, I think you're in the front page of the sports section of the Washington Post. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, were you behind home plate? I'm like, yeah. They're like, you're standing up behind home plate and you can see the pitch. Like if you go and Google the first pitch, I'm standing there. My buddy Lee, who didn't stand up, he has like this much of his head in the picture. Like you can barely see it because he didn't stand up. But that's kind of life. Like you miss things from time to time, like the inauguration ball, but you have to say, I got to pick and choose my spots. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the amount of stuff I've actually physically gotten to go to. And I always kind of stop and say, okay, this is something pretty cool, pretty critical. It's a flashbulb thing. I don't want to miss it. And I don't want to have regret around it. And that's why with good conscience, I could say, okay, I missed the 2009 inauguration, but I got a pretty good body of work here.
And if you have good friends, they'll remind you on a regular basis how good the party was that you missed. They'll just make sure to really, really make the regret sting and feel really hard about how good that inauguration ball was.
The immature ones will tell you how many beers you missed and will maybe show you pictures of themselves doing splits on the dance floor.
Their arm around Obama, smiling, drinking champagne.
But the other side of it is it's to rub it in a little bit, but hey, you missed this last one. I'm not going to let you miss the next one.
That's part of that is don't miss the next one.
Yeah.
Part of that good-natured ribbing is I want you to know that this was good. When we get another opportunity, suck it up. And a lot of times with those kind of things, the things that I've missed that I've regretted, it's almost always you're tired at work. You're thinking about getting up in the morning the next day. You've got a lot of things due, but you got to kind of understand when you get those opportunities to do something really fun, or you get invited to something you're not normally invited to. I used to get invited to charity stuff all the time at MVR, and most of the time it was annoying, but one of them was I got a chance to see Lou Holt speak, and I got a chance to sit at a charity dinner, which means I got to sit for 2 hours with people I work with that I don't feel like being around and talking about stuff I don't feel like talking about. But it all led up to getting to see Lou Holtz for 1 hour, and I was 10 feet from him. And I remember at the time, I was so close to bagging out of it. I don't remember what was going on. I was busy. And maybe I had to be up in Maryland the next day, some stupid meeting that's the same as a million other stupid meetings I've been to. But I remember his whole speech. And I remember how close I came to getting out of it because of all the other stuff around it. But I'm glad I went to it. You have to kind of force yourself to say, I think this always comes back to the Bezos regret minimization. Am I going to really regret this? Is this one thing that is kind of a once in a lifetime? Should I suck it up and just go be at this? Because this is kind of some history for me.
And that's the coolest thing about life is the goal of this podcast is to talk about today. Don't be so wrapped up in business and goals that you miss other incredible moments in life. One of my favorite memories in my entire life was giving a toast at my sister's wedding. And I joked about it because usually the older brother of the bride doesn't give a toast at a wedding. But my sister got married on a Thursday, which also isn't normal. So everybody was bitching about it because, it's freaking Thursday. You got to kill your week to get to a wedding. So everybody's there, they're bitching about it. So I made a joke and I was like, it's a little known rule that on a wedding that happens on a Thursday, the oldest brother of the bride has to make a toast. So here it is. And in case anybody was unaware, it's Thursday. So it got a bunch of laughs. But the coolest thing for me was I was close enough to my sister where I was given an opportunity to make a really cool toast. And what was in the toast doesn't matter for this context, but the cool thing about the toast I talked about is there's flashbulb moments that you have in your life. And up until that point, I'm guessing I will be replaced in the flashbulb moments because my sister's married with kids and she's got her own stuff. But at those moments, I was a part of it, or I wouldn't have been asked to participate. And that was really cool because up to that moment, I was important enough to be a part of it. And the reason I was important enough to be a part of it is I did not let the fact that I was 14 years older than her get in the way of us having an incredible friendship. The fact that I moved out of the house when she was 4, I didn't let that get in the way of the fact that she was still my sister and I was going to be incredibly close with her. Where when she had spring break, I flew her up to spend time with me while she was in middle and high school because it was my sister and I wanted to see her. And, she was 13. I'm in my late 20s and, I got a job and I got all kinds of other stuff, but I prioritized it. And because I made those priorities, I had a great relationship and I had a great role in that event. But those are the little things that you look at when you have kids, cousins or nephews or family. You're not going to be a preeminent person in those people's lives unless you slow down and you become a preeminent person in their lives.
You've never been one for tradition anyway. Most people don't throw their own 40th birthday party, invite everyone, and then give a boozy 1.5 hour speech about themselves. So you're kind of one to create new traditions yourself. You're actually the only person I know that's ever done something like that. So you giving a speech at your sister's wedding is actually not shocking whatsoever to me.
For those of you not looking at video, Ian was flicked off for a prolonged period of time.
When your buddy gets really drunk at his 40th, the smart thing to do is go over to him and say, you got to go give a speech, man. Everyone's waiting for it. Everyone really wants to hear you talk. So let's move on to the next part of our agenda. So I want to talk a little bit about
the 50th.
Yeah. So your 50th is going to be really epic. I think, before kids, I always had this preconceived notion in business that, and I don't know if it's because I started with such a big company, but the junior people should be in the office later than the senior people. You shouldn't leave until the boss leaves.
You want to beat them there in the morning.
Your car's there in the morning. It's kind of like the Costanza episode where his car's in the lot the whole weekend and everyone thinks he's working hard because he's beating the boss to the office and they're later than the last guy. But I had that Costanza feeling, always of I should be out working the people that are above me because I want to show them that I deserve it and I'm there. And before kids, I would have never considered leaving the office before 5. I mean, forget 5, before 6:30, 7. I was always in the office super late. And everyone knew that. And then you have kids. And, for me, it happened almost immediately where it's like, I took a week off, hang back with Jenny. Then that became a few extra days and everything went fine. And just everything didn't seem as important after that. And I got comfortable. And I think for me, this is important in that I had a boss who coached his boys in baseball. So when my son was a baby, when IJ was a baby, his kids were in their teens. And on a regular basis, he would leave at 3:00 because he had to get all the way back up, past the Beltway. And, I would learn later, you don't get baseball field times when you want them. Sometimes you don't get you get a field at 4:30. So he would just leave and he wasn't apologetic. He wasn't like, I'm really sorry, but he'd be like, nah, I'm coaching. We got a game at 6:00 up north of Baltimore. So I'm out at 3. And that always stuck with me as a leadership lesson. And this is a guy that I ultimately didn't get along with in a lot of other ways, but it was modeling exactly how you should model. It's one thing to tell your team you should have balance. It's another thing to be brave enough to say, I'm going to coach my kids this year. And that means I'm going to leave 3 days a week at 3:00, but I'm going to get in early and you can get me after, but from 3 to 6, don't bug me. And it gave me a lot of confidence seeing him do that 6 years later when I started coaching T-ball that I did it myself.
I think it's important nowadays. So we're recording this on Zoom. Most of the meetings that I host nowadays are on Zoom. And traditional working hours are not what they used to be. They just aren't. We have We have technology at home. We have like in the old days, you have to go back to the office and do things. Like we can do that stuff wherever we go, as long as there's a Wi-Fi connection or a Zoom connection. So there is that ability now because of technology. And as a manager, I'm aware of that with my people, like constantly. Like I want to make sure that there's something important to them. I want to be able to give them the ability to do those things, because by and large, the majority of the people who work for me work incredibly hard. And I think they're adults, they can handle it. But I'll tell a story because I think this is relevant. About 2 months ago, we had a snowstorm in Richmond, which we get 1 or 2 a year. And in a normal winter, you won't get a ton of accumulation. It was a Friday and it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock. And I was pretty well finished with my day, but I wasn't completely finished. And I remember thinking like, maybe I should blow this off. But as a grown up, like just for me, I would have blown it off. I would have kept working. I've missed 100 snowstorms in my life where everyone goes to bars and gets drunk and I just worked all day. But in this instance, I said, you know what? I'm going to go up and see my brother-in-law and his 2 kids. And they got a 4-wheeler and they got all kinds of stuff. And my son was excited as hell. So we went up and we did it. We had a blast. It's snowing. Like he's in the back seat. He's got a huge cheesy grin in a photo that we have. It's awesome. But being the dipshit that I am, I've got my son and I do 3 loops around this like turnaround. And I go off to the side in a non-paved section. And I'm not great on a 4-wheeler to start with. And my son's 2. He can't hold on to himself. So I can't completely turn the 4-wheeler. I can't. And I end up getting stuck. And I get stuck on the shoulder, like 200, 300 yards away from Chad, my brother-in-law, his kids, and all the kids we're out with. And I'm trying to move the thing. Now, if I didn't have my son, I could have very easily turned, because it does that power steering, but it needed like the might of 2 arms pushing it. But I didn't have that because I had my son in 1 arm and I was just pushing it with this and I get stuck. So I'm trying to rev the thing and my son starts screaming and crying. Like this whole thing, he's like just melting down. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So like, I don't know what to do. And then I finally just said, screw it. I just got my cell phone on. I called Chad. I said, can you help me get this thing out of the mud? So I get stuck in the mud with my son. He's crying, whole thing. Turns out I almost checked email and continued to work over being a part of the first permanent memory my son ever had. For 8 weeks, the first thing he said to me when I woke him up in the morning, get him out of his crib, Dada, stuck in the mud? He would like recount the whole story.
Max has told me multiple times he was stuck in the mud.
It's incredible. Like, is it the best story ever? No. Did I want to get stuck in the mud? No. But it's that stuff of, if you're not present, there's no way you know when an incredible memory is going to happen. We got pictures of us. He's laughing afterwards. Everything turned out fine. But I almost missed it for work. But instead, I did enough and I came back and did the work later. And I got to participate in something pretty awesome that turned out to be a really funny memory that I would have missed had I, not said I can blow off work for 2 hours.
I love it. And it's, as you're talking, I think to me, so much of business is not memorable because there's so many hours we spend. There's flashbulb moments in business that you and I remember, and that's what pretty much this podcast is us remembering certain things and it getting jarred loose. But in general, you remember vacations a lot more. And I think as you're talking, one thing I'm thinking about, I try to be very deliberate in the vacations I take, that they're not always to the same place, that they're not something that would gel in with another one. So it's, even though I just said I've been to Vegas a lot of times, I wouldn't really even call those vacations. I think with my family, I like to go places that are unique, different, where we see different things, where it's easy for me, my wife, and my kids to remember it a certain way. We've been to Fort Lauderdale many times, but all the Fort Lauderdale trips just blend together, so Jenny likes going to the same places a lot, but I don't for that reason, because to me, it's like, I'm not going to remember this trip. It's going to be just one more trip when I was in Fort Lauderdale, eating at the same places, sitting on the same beach. I like to see new things when I go places. So that's you're stuck in the mud story. The lesson for me that comes out of it is to try to make every vacation as unique as humanly possible, or you won't remember it as well.
Yeah. It's find little hacks that mean something to you. So this is nothing we've talked about, but it just popped in my head and I'll talk about it. So like I run a business. We have a relatively large business. So if I was to take my credit card points and I was to put it through a cashback program, I probably get $10,000 to $15,000 annually in cashback rewards. And I've talked to my brother about this, and he's kind of a penny pincher. He's like, I would get the cash back, and I don't. I have an American Express card. I like the American Express card, but what I like about it is I accrue points, and I use those points for things that I really like. I've flown first class with my wife to Africa. I've booked week-long vacations at places that I would never want to spend that much money for a place because of it. So for me, it's if I was getting $800 back a month, like if you add that up, that's great. It adds up to something. But I would so much rather have it in something that is tangible and tradable and memorable. And it's one of those things where it's like a forced savings plan for fun. And we use it that way. It's like, hey, I got to know an X number amount of points now. You want to look at going to do something cool for 4 days where you don't have to pay a penny. It just comes out of that account. And it kind of forces you into having really cool memories.
I can't think of a fun vacation, a unique vacation that I've been on that I regretted the spend, no matter how much the spend was.
Exactly.
I've, and now we have money, but Jenny and I went to Asia for 2 weeks when we were dead broke. We went to, and I'm so glad we did it. We went to Bali and we went to Hong Kong and, tried to do it on the biggest budget that we could. I went to London when I had no money. I went to multiple different places in Mexico. Jenny and I went on trips when we were just married or getting I don't know. I never, when I didn't have the money and even I had to put it on credit cards and pay it later, I've never regretted a fun trip that was interesting and novel. And to me, it's from a return on investment of how to spend my money. I've always got huge bangs out of experiences like that, trips like that.
I agree completely. And the trips, they can be pains in the asses. You need to go to your boss and say, I need extended periods of time. But what I have always felt when I came back from a trip, I always felt invigorated by the trip. I felt like I was a better worker. I felt like I was smarter. And as an employer, when I see someone who wants to do a several-week trip to Europe or Asia, like I support it. It's like, let's figure out how to make sure that does happen for you. And if you're ever at a crossroads of, I want to do this trip, but I shouldn't or I can't, unless it's like, it's just completely and totally something that will cause detriment, do it. Figure out how to do it. And ways that we did it in my life where I couldn't afford things, but it kind of manifested. I had friends who were like, you should come on this trip. If you figure it out, I'll give you some airline miles. Like I would stay at friends and parents of friends' houses on trips I couldn't afford because they were they were a bus ride or a train ride from a really cool city. And those are incredible trips. And the other thing is like, all right, I need a week or I need 10 days there. I've flown to Europe for 4 and 5 days. I've flown to England for 3. Like you can also squeeze an absolute metric ton of crap into a 4-day weekend. Squeeze it in. Like that's the coolest thing is like how do you force in time away and memories?
So, a common bond that my father and I have had always has been Detroit sports, and the Tigers probably being the first love for me and for him. Tigers won the championship when I was 8 years old, 1984. So you think about it, that's like 8, 9, 10 years old. That's probably peak time where you love baseball. It's when every little boy owns baseball cards, plays Little League. Like, right? You weren't a big baseball player, but you played Little League. I'll guarantee you played Little League. First sport you play.
And the reality hasn't set in yet. Like you haven't gotten the middle in high school where reality set in that you're not good enough. Like it's going to end. Yeah. Like everybody gets to play at that age.
Every little American boy plays baseball growing up, and you all have a local team. So to have a team that won a championship when you're 8, when you're just coming into that love, was big. So they've always been big with me and my dad. And he worked in a steel mill. He didn't have a lot of money, and he didn't get a lot of time off. But I remember we drove down to spring training. It was like 3 days of driving in his Cadillac. It was awful and hot, and we couldn't afford plane tickets, but he took me to spring training. We went down there for a week. We saw like 3 or 4 games. We got lots of autographs, did some amusement parks. And I know at the time it was really stressful for him to pull that off, to get the time off first and to pay for it. We were kind of on a shoestring budget the whole way, staying in motels, everything. It was not an easy trip for him to pull off, but when you talk about like first memories, I was in 5th grade. I remember everything about that trip, how proud I was to be with my dad, to be going on a trip, just the 2 of us. It's not a family trip. My sister's not here. It's a baseball trip. It was a big deal to me. And in 2006, the Tigers made it to the World Series. And I bought 2 tickets as soon as it happened for me and the old man. And I took him to the World Series game in 2006. We saw 2-0 Tigers win. It was amazing October night. And then some 7 years later, they're back in 2013. So now it's not as novel. I've already been there with my dad, and it was already creeping in a little like, well, we kind of just did the World Series, and the Tigers were loaded. They were just loaded with like Cy Young winners everywhere. It was a good team. And I remember thinking like, they might get back next year. And the reason I started thinking that, Frank, is this is right around the time where we were like on our 3rd president in 3 years. And this one was a real ball buster, and he was coming in and he, was just questioning everything. I was stressed out at work, 2013. We had all these audits, a bunch of bullshit going on. And this time I had to blow off a meeting in corporate to do it. I had to tell him, this is why I'm missing this meeting. I was expected to be there, expected to talk about something. Look, I have to be in Detroit. I'm just going. And I remember it was really hard for me to make that decision. Looking back on it, it's absolutely asinine that I'm even saying this, because it turned out to be one of my favorite weekends in a long time. But I went and I talked to my boss, and he was like, that's really cool. And I remember like I was expecting him to be a total jerk, but he was like, that's really cool. You're taking your dad to that game. And I almost just didn't do it because I didn't want to have that conversation. And he had more respect for me after that. I said, I'm blowing off this meeting and I'm going to go take my old man to a Tigers game to see a World Series game. He had more respect for me that I came and told him that after that fact. And I look back on it, I'm so grateful I did it. The Tigers haven't been back since, and I'll probably never go to another World Series game with my dad. That's just the facts.
Yep. I can say something and belabor it, but yeah. And you and I have talked about this. Sports is important to both of us. My granddad, this was 2004. My granddad died in 2017. So he was like he was in his early 70s, but he was in ill health, and he'd been in ill health for years. And people will ask me, how did your granddad live so long? I said, modern medicine, my grandmother, and his addiction to gambling. Those are the 3 things that kept the guy alive. The 4th thing was the Red Sox. Like, he used to love to sit on his recliner chair and watch the Red Sox. And one year for Christmas, I just said, I'm buying him tickets to the Red Sox. And everyone's like, he won't go. You can't do it. I said, fine. I'm going to figure it out. And I remember I gave him the tickets, and he kind of blew it off and didn't say anything about it. And Christmas is in December. The Red Sox don't start playing until April. So I called him up in like April. I'm like, Gramps, I'm buying 2 tickets for the first game of the season. It just so happened to be the game that it was A-Rod's first game on the Yankees at Fenway. And I was like, we're going. And he's like, he's hemming and hawing. I go, look, I got a car. I got a parking spot that's close to the stadium. I got us the closest thing they have in that old stadium to like accessible seats. Like, if you're uncomfortable, we'll stop, we'll move slow, whatever. Like, we are getting our asses to that stadium. We are going to sit down and watch some of that game. We're going to eat a hot dog, and then we're going to go back to the car. And he lived for about 14 more years. Every time I saw him, he talked to me about that game. And everybody in my family told me it was impossible to do. And it was difficult, and we had to be very careful because of him and his health. But it's one of those things that I cherish as a memory because I have it and I did it. And I just didn't list everybody else's crap. We just did it. And it was awesome.
I love that. You have to recognize when something's special and understand that it's more important than work, period. I have one more on this. Bob Seger did what was supposed to be his last tour. So he was over 60 now. And for anyone listening from Michigan, Bob Seger is life when you're growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. He is the guy in Michigan by far, right? Now, people might think Eminem, Kid Rock now. When you're growing up, Bob Seger is the guy. My whole family, my sister loves him, my mom loves him. And so, again, I remember I was really busy at work, which is the theme. Both of us were always really busy at work at MVR. It's a big company, big corporation. And my sister was like, look, he's coming through Michigan. He's playing these, he's playing Auburn Hills. It might be his last time in Michigan. And I remember just being like, I don't know if I have time to go back and do this. And long story short, I bought tickets. I took my sister one night. Neil came. A few of my buddies from Chicago came in. We went and saw Seger. It was rowdy. It was fun. We stayed at the MGM in Detroit. And then the next night, I went and saw him again, but this time with just my mom. So my mom and I went, and I was dragging that day, but it was like, we were rowdy. Just me and mom were having so much fun. And I remember thinking most that night, like, I'm never going to see Bob Seger with my mom again. Like, we grew up listening to this in her car all the time. This was the right move. Good decision, Ian. You won't remember. I have no idea what was going on at work, and nor would it matter. Some stupid mortgage bull crap. That's all I know. That really doesn't matter. That would go on without me. But I remember those concerts like they were yesterday. I remember the whole song set from those concerts, and it was a decade ago.
So music is important. Anybody in life, music is important. It creates memories. I just think, for me, there's a formula. When you see something that's either rare, that won't happen again, that you think would be something that either connects with you or someone in your life, I think you have to figure out how do you connect the dots. So I went to the school kind of like you with Seger. I went to University of Florida, and Tom Petty was huge there. He was from Gainesville and moved to LA, and he became huge in LA, but he still had, his record label was Gone Gator, which is like literally like
awesome.
He was the guy. So like when I didn't have a lot of money, I used to always tell people, like, if I'd overpay for something, I would just buy it from a scalper and I'd just pay through the nose. And I just tell, I got a guy, he hooked me up. I got it for a great price. I would just completely lie.
Yeah.
And Nickel and I went to a show and saw Petty like third row in like 2006. But then it just so happened that the Beacon Theater, Petty was doing a run at the Beacon, and I read about it or saw it somewhere. I called Jeff and he's like, we're going. I'm like, yeah. And we went to the Beacon, and he played like one of my favorite, like deep cuts, like that you wouldn't really know unless it was there. We saw him. It was incredible. Jeff and I had like a whole day in New York together just to shoot the breeze. And Petty died like 24 months later, dead, like out of nowhere, poof, dies. Never going to see him again. Like, but that's the thing, is you got to pick this stuff. Like if you're working, why? Like if you're able, if you have some ability to afford fun things, you got to, and you got to create those memories, because they will not be created for you, and you're never going to regret creating them.
My hope is that this pandemic, Frank, has changed a lot of managers permanently, that over a year that more managers are thinking, some things just aren't as important as they should be. And there's been enough blend of personal and work because of what we were forced into, that there's just a whole new cadre of managers that want people to get experiences, that recognize the shortness of life, that recognize that things like that don't come too often. To me, as a manager, it's selfish to let people take those opportunities. And the reason it's selfish is because you do it because that engenders loyalty. You let people go have their Seager moment, their World Series moment, their personal moment. You let them coach teams because they'll stay with you, that you give them that opportunity, and they'll work even harder. They'll do more for you when you do that. And again, to me, it's not just about telling people, hey, balance matters, put your family first. You as a manager have to do it. And you have to be vocal about, this is what I'm going to do. Hey, I won't be here Thursday, Friday, and here's why. I'm going to a tournament. My daughter's got a cheerleader tournament and I'm going to be there. That's right. And when you do those kind of things, it's like that opens the door much more than telling people that they can take work off, that they can do those things. When you're willing to do it as a manager, as a leader, now you don't want to be gone all the time. You have to show some work ethic. They have to know you're willing to grind. But when you're willing to put that first, it tells everyone else it's safe for you to put your personal life first from time to time.
It's funny because like during the pandemic, I chose not to take a paycheck. So I didn't take a paycheck for 7 months. And the end of the year, it turned around and we could afford it. So I took a paycheck. But I ended up taking off some time last summer, and I took off more time again in January. And I have a pregnant wife, my family's expanding. And it's funny because everyone in the business was like, you need to take some time. And like people were rallying to make sure that I didn't get calls and, like, hey, Frank needs to go away. And culturally, like, one of our senior employees just took a week off, and we all got our heads together. We're like, all right, no one's calling him. Like, we're not calling him. Like, I'm not calling him. You're not calling him. It becomes cultural. It's like, we can handle this for you because you need to have some time with your family. And what you end up doing as a boss, as a human, if you do and enjoy and take time, you put in the work, but then you take time and you enjoy some of those things that you deserve and you share it. And then you help protect it for others. People that you manage, you make sure you go out of your way so they can carve time out in their lives. Are you going to lose some work? Sure. What are you going to gain? Longevity, performance, all these other things that people will then do to do an even better job because they know you care about them. In addition to that, most people don't think this way. So if you do think and protect your employees and make sure that they're having good relationships with their kids and their spouses, and you do little things, just little things to show them that you care, it goes such a long way. And it becomes systemic. I do something for someone that works for me, they see it's allowable. Someone who works for them, they do the same thing. They extend the same courtesy. It becomes cultural. And that's how you really build a team. And that's how you get people who have meaningful relationships at work, because we all take care of the human side of the other person.
And I think some of the takeaways, obviously, be deliberate about how you spend your time and who you spend it with. Just be deliberate. Stop every once in a while and think, who have I been spending my time with the past month, 2 months, 3 months, a year? And are those the kind of people I want to spend my time with? When I look back in 50 years, am I going to say that was the crew that I should have spent time with? And I'll look at 2020 for me. Really good friend of mine in Vienna, he was transitioning from one job to the next. And his contract went all the way through the end of the year. So he was getting a paycheck and he was looking for what his next one was going to be. It was kind of a big life transition. But our kids play baseball together. So our baseball season got canceled. And so we started showing up at our field at 11 o'clock every day. I'd be like, hey, I know you're not working. You know me, my hours are what they are. You want to meet at 11. Then, we went out, we played for 2 hours, just Nate and IJ play baseball. And then at 1 o'clock, it's over. We're kind of all sweaty. And I'd say, tomorrow, 11? He's like, yeah, hell, I don't have anything going on. That went on, Frank, for like 3 months. 3 months. We could, it's kind of our summer of fun. We did it every day. And we both knew, we didn't have to talk about it. We knew this is kind of special. This whole pandemic, because our kids only had an hour of virtual a day. Like the schools didn't know what to do. So it's not like we weren't pulling kids out of school. And it was, when you say identify something special when you have an opportunity, that to me was special. Like I'm never going to get an opportunity again where I could literally play baseball for 2 hours during the school year for 3 months with my son. I'm going to do it every day. And I found time to work on before and after it. But we both took advantage of that special moment to be around our kids and have fun. And we're going to be talking about that in 20 years. Do you remember how fun that summer of 2020 was? It was great.
As crappy as the pandemic was, I think if you were conscious during it, and if it didn't negatively impact you and it didn't hurt your business or things like that, there was phases of it for me. So your phase was you got to the fun part faster. I went through a lot of pain. I went through, like, I think I'm going to go out of business. I got to fire a bunch of staff. The market is closing. I went through a bunch of pain, and that took about 90 to 120 days. But the pandemic lasted a year. About 120 days in, I was like, okay, unless I get sick, we're going to make it. The business is going to make it. I'm going to live. I just put in this ridiculous amount of time. I've missed a bunch of stuff, but now I got to start emerging from this. Like, that chapter needs to end, and it's time to move forward. And the sacrifice that I made during that stretch of time needs to be rewarded with other things. And what I traded it for is now, since the pandemic, I've gotten my son up and tucked him in every day. Like, that's my time. I don't miss it. I put in that extra time. We got through it. I can't play baseball with him yet. He's not big enough. But I started to pick and choose little things where we have our time together, because that to me was a trade-off I was unwilling to make anymore. And so there's the survival side, and you got to make sure that works. But then you got to pick stuff like, I need to create these memories. You did it, Ian. You created the memory. For me, I did other stuff. I sit with my son and read books. We do different stuff, but every day we do it, and we do it together, and it's not missed, because that becomes a routine. And that's the stuff in 2020, what I'm going to remember is my son coming into my office with his butt with no pants on, or us sitting down and reading books, or us going to the playground when no other kids were there. Like, those are the fun things that create incredible memories. Or, 90 days ago, going and getting stuck in the mud.
Totally. So be deliberate, work the phone. I'm going to get off this call, and I'm going to call my parents for sure when we get off this podcast. When you're around people, the limited nature, the beauty of the blog post is the limited nature of how many days you have left with certain people, or days you have left to do things. It's less than you think when you look at it graphically and visually. So when you're around them, don't be in your phone, don't be clown. Like, focus on being around people when you're with them, when you're around them. That's one of my biggest takeaways of that blog post is time you have left with your parents, time you have left before your kids go off on their own and don't give a damn about hanging around you, time you have left with your friends. This is a big reason why Frank and I do a podcast. It kind of forces us to hang out every week, and we realize that's valuable time because both of us have kids, wives, businesses, other things that we're doing that aren't interrelated. So this is kind of one of our few things we have where it forces us to have some cool time hanging out. I guess to wrap this up, I think it's worth memorializing it just because we're recording this. What's happening tomorrow, Frank?
My wife's getting induced. I'm having a second kid.
We're having a baby tomorrow. You and I are on a phone right now, clowning around, doing a podcast. You're having a baby. So it's worth you saying, what are all the things going through that brain of yours right now?
Talking about wanting to be present, my wife is emotional because last time it just happened and boof, it was there. And this time it's been harder. And she's 41, I'm 46. Like, we're at advanced age for a kid. And what Ian talked about being present, I'm checking everything off the box. I got up this morning. I was at the gym at 6:30. I was in the field working this morning. I went to the office. It's about 3:00 now. We're knocking this out because tomorrow when I go there, I want to put my cell phone in a bag and not touch it. And I want to be there and be present with my wife. And that was the one thing she said to me, like today in prep, she's like, hey, I need you to be present tomorrow. I'm like, so I'm going to go record with Ian today. Like, we're going to get this off the list. And that way I don't have to do anything but just be there. And sometimes you don't have the ability to plan ahead, and you got to realize I got to just push this stuff away. And then sometimes you can say, you know what, I can just push really hard so I can get in there and I can enjoy it. And that's it. There's going to be 2 births in my life. That's it with kids. We're done after this. It's like you only get 2 of them. And I remember the first one. I want to be present with the second one. And Ian, the last story I'm going to tell is this one. After my son was born, bath time was a big deal. I was a worker. I get up, I go to work. I wouldn't see him a lot during the day. And like having a small child at bath time, it's kind of like when things were starting to melt down. But that was my time with him when he was first born. And I remember during that stretch of time, I was worried about something at work. And I'm not going to talk about what it was that I was worried about. I can tell you, I absolutely know who it was, what I was worried about, all of it, but it's not as relevant. And I want to leave that person out of this. So I was at bath time every night with my son for, months 1 through 4. And I was worrying about this work issue and this person while I was in the tub with my son, or like on top of the tub while I was giving them a bath. And I learned an incredible lesson. If I'm in bath time and I'm thinking about you or something you're doing at work or some segment of business, it needs to go away. And that was my lesson. If I can't be present here in this moment, I need to eliminate that thing that's allowing me not to be present or causing me not to be present. And that's what I did. And that's, I think, growing up and having kids, what it changes is your perspective of, I'm no longer willing to allow things to penetrate into here. And I'm going to stop that. And that's what I did. And then that's what tomorrow is. Like, we're getting all this stuff done. So I am ready to go in there and do whatever my wife needs me to do, because she needs me to be present and supportive.
I love that you just said, be present tomorrow. I remember every minute of the 2 days my kids are born, and you're no longer a rookie. You've been through it once, but, when my son was born, so he's born, it's an amazing moment. We take some pictures. I'm there for Jenny. Jenny's falls asleep, right? We get kind of wheeled away. Baby gets wheeled away. Nurses start doing what they're doing. Jenny's tired. We get back to her room. Jenny kind of zones out, starts sleeping. So I'm wide awake. I'm still wired. Jenny's sleeping. I'm by myself in the room, and I check emails. And in that emails is just the nastiest email from, some controller, some finance guy in our company, just shredding one of my managers and CCing me. And I can't, some audit issue, something, but it was the dumbest thing I've ever done in my entire life, was checking emails that night. It was just habit. I was bored. I didn't have anything else to look at. And I think we're all kind of accustomed to scrolling and looking. And then, dating myself, it might even have been a BlackBerry, right? I was just looking at my emails. I didn't even have much to look at. And it put me in a crappy mood for the next few hours. To the point where I couldn't get to sleep. I was so irritated, and I was more irritated with myself for checking emails. And looking back on it 10 years later, I could care less about anything that was in that email. It's stupid. It wasn't a major issue. It wasn't life-changing, but it put a sour note on a beautiful day for me and taught me a really good lesson about when and when not to look at your phone in certain moments. So love your whole thought of put that phone in a bag. Nothing is happening tomorrow that you need to look at your phone for, brother. So just you, Ellie, and the baby, put that phone away. You don't need that shit. Your dad didn't need one when you were being born. You certainly don't need one tomorrow. Life will go on with whatever's happening on that phone.
And I think I want to wrap by saying this. Everything with this podcast is things that we've learned, our experiences, and our interpretation of it. It's not preaching. This is something you must do at every given moment in your life. Is you must analyze where you're at, what you're doing, what's the best use. Sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you get it wrong. I do know from prior training that tomorrow is a flashbulb moment in my life. I know that I was when Jerry Seinfeld says it this way, when 2 people go into a room and 3 come out, a major thing just happened. So tomorrow, a major thing is going to happen in my life. And I have learned enough to realize that I must be there, or I'm robbing the people that are important to me who are in the room and myself of that opportunity. And that's just not something I'm willing to do.
Love it. Love it. Well, I appreciate that you squeezed in one more episode. I don't know when we're going to record again next, but I can't wait to get pictures tomorrow of your baby. And pretty cool that we were able to record you and your merch on the day before the birthday of your second child. Pretty awesome. And that merch, you son of a bitch, you better send me one of those hats, because that's pretty. I know you bought 2. You didn't just buy one, you selfish SOB. I know one's coming. What are you laughing at? You didn't get me some merch? You're the worst co-host.
Oh, stop it. To all our loyal listeners.
Hey, this moment was special until Frank proved how selfish he was by getting himself merch and none for me.
Ian, you son of a bitch.
See you, bro.
See you, man.
We sitting here, I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we're talking about practice. Not a game. We talking about practice.